Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into some seriously thought-provoking stuff. Today we're tackling movements that shake things up. The ones that challenge the whole system.
That's right, those movements that really push for fundamental change.
And to guide us through this, we've got Immanuel Wallerstein's work, a pretty insightful look at these movements throughout history.
Oh, Wallerstein, yeah, he's a great guide for this kind of exploration.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't just give us a list of movements, he offers a framework for understanding them, seeing the connections between these groups, fighting for change across time.
Exactly, and one of the things that really jumped out at me was his use of the term antisystemic movements. It's such a broad term when you think about it.
It is broad, isn't it? It covers everything from those classic social movements like socialist parties and labor unions fighting for workers' rights to national liberation movements, those groups pushing for independence.
Yeah, it's fascinating that he groups those together. I mean, they often had very different goals, even conflicting ones sometimes. But Wallerstein points out they share some surprising similarities.
Definitely some intriguing parallels there. Like, he highlights how both social and national movements often use that really powerful revolutionary rhetoric, right, to inspire and mobilize people.
Oh, absolutely. That fiery language calling for a complete overhaul. And they both faced a ton of pushback in their early stages.
Oh, yeah, major repression, attempts to silence them, squash their efforts before they could gain traction. And think about those internal debates over strategy. Every movement has them, right? The arguments over the best way to achieve their goals.
Always those internal struggles, trying to figure out the most effective path to change. And it's interesting how sometimes the lines between social and national goals would get kind of blurred.
Oh, absolutely. They weren't always so neatly separated. Sometimes a movement for social change would become intertwined with a fight for national liberation, or vice versa.
It's almost like they were all speaking different languages, but ultimately aiming for a similar endpoint. They wanted to reshape the world to fit their ideals. And that common enemy, the system, as Wallerstein calls it, often brought them together, even if it was an uneasy alliance sometimes.
Exactly. That shared opposition to the existing power structures, the status quo, that's a powerful unifying force. They might disagree on the specifics of what the new world should look like, but they were united in their belief that the current one needed to change,
Right, a shared sense of something's got to give. Now, Wallerstein talks about this two-step strategy that many of these movements adopted. What exactly did that involve?
Well, the first step was gaining power within the existing state. That could be through elections for those groups working within the system, or through revolution for those who saw the system itself as the problem.
So step one is basically get your hands on the levers of power, one way or another. And then what?
Step two, well, that's where you use that newfound power to transform the world according to the movement's vision. Seems straightforward enough on paper, right? But Wallerstein points out it rarely played out that smoothly in reality.
This is where it gets really interesting to me. Wallerstein talks about this irony, this disconnect between the revolutionary zeal of these movements and what they were often able to achieve once they actually gained power. It's like that climb to the top changed them, or maybe just revealed the limits of what's actually possible.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? And Wallerstein offers some insights into why this happened. One factor he points to is the inherent limitation of state power, especially within a globalized system.
You mean like, even if you manage to stage a revolution and take control of your own country, you're still operating within a larger global context. You can't just completely isolate yourself from the rest of the world.
Exactly. You're still bound by international relations, economic pressures, all those interconnected forces that shape the world. No single country, even one with a revolutionary government, can operate in a vacuum.
So even if you manage to grab the steering wheel, you're still driving on a road built by someone else, and you might not be able to change the direction as much as you'd hoped.
Yeah, sobering realization for those hoping to create a completely new world order. And there's also the human element to consider, that revolutionary fervor, that passionate energy that fuels these movements. It tends to wane once the initial thrill of victory wears off.
So it's like once you're actually in power, you've got to deal with the day-to-day realities of governing. And sometimes those realities can be pretty mundane, even disillusioning.
Exactly. Plus, as Wallerstein observes, a new elite often emerges within these movements, people who end up benefiting disproportionately from the new order, even if it's supposedly based on principles of equality.
So it's a bit of a meet the new boss, same as the old boss situation in some cases.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing this all ties into why 1968 was such a pivotal year, a turning point for these anti-systemic movements.
Oh, definitely. 1968 was a year of global upheaval, marked by protests and uprisings all over the world. And a lot of it was fueled by this growing disillusionment with traditional movements, both social and national.
It's like people had put their faith in these movements, believed they could truly deliver on their promises of a better world, and then realized that maybe the reality wasn't quite living up to those expectations.
Exactly. And 1968 became a symbol of that disillusionment, a moment where people started questioning whether the old approaches to challenging the system were actually working.
So what happened next? Did this lead to a sense of apathy, or did something else emerge from the ashes of these traditional movements? We'll have to find out after the break. All right, so we've walked through this history of these anti-systemic movements, those groups that really try to challenge the powers that be. But where does that leave us now, in the 21st century? Wallerstein says we're right in the middle of a systemic transition, like the old order is breaking down. But what comes next? Well, that's a big question mark.
Yeah, it's a time of great uncertainty, that's for sure. But Wallerstein doesn't see it as all doom and gloom. He actually suggests that this period of transition, while messy and unpredictable, presents a really unique opportunity.
Oh, interesting. So he's not saying we're all doomed.
Not at all. He's more saying that the old ways of challenging the system, those might not be as effective anymore. Like the old playbook might need some serious revisions.
Okay, so if those old strategies, storming the best deal, so to speak, or even winning elections, if those aren't going to cut it, what does Wallerstein propose? How do we navigate this kind of chaotic transition and try to move towards a future that's more just and sustainable?
Well, he lays out 4 key components for a new approach. The first one really resonated with me. He emphasizes how important it is to have those open and honest debates about the world we want to create. Like, it's not about clinging to these rigid ideologies or trying to force a predetermined plan onto this really complex world.
I like that. It's like acknowledging we don't have all the answers, right? And being willing to have those tough conversations, even when they're messy and uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about being open to new ideas, willing to learn from each other, and really truly imagine a future that's better than what we have now.
It's like embracing the uncertainty and acknowledging that the best solutions might emerge from those unexpected places, right?
Absolutely. And it's not about just endless theorizing either. Wallerstein knows we need to respond to those very real problems people are facing right now in the world. Which brings us to his second component, those short-term defensive actions.
So like those immediate steps to prevent things from getting worse while still working towards something bigger, more transformative.
Exactly. Think about those groups that are fighting to protect essential public services like healthcare and education, or those advocating for policies to address climate change. Those are crucial battles, even if they don't completely overturn the system overnight.
They're like holding actions, buying time, right?
Yeah.
So we can work on those bigger, longer-term changes.
Right, exactly. Those defensive actions are essential. They can offer immediate relief, stop things from getting even worse, and they can really build momentum for that more systemic change down the line. But, it's really easy to get caught up in those day-to-day struggles, those urgent problems that need solving right now.
It's like, how do you keep your eye on the bigger picture when there are so many fires to put out in the present?
That's the question. And that's where Wallerstein's third component comes in. He talks about these interim goals, those stepping stones that can move us in the right direction, even if they don't get us to the final destination right away.
I like that. The stepping stones idea gives you those smaller, more achievable targets to aim for while still working towards that larger vision.
Exactly. And one of those interim goals he specifically talks about is decommodification. Now, that's kind of a mouthful of a word.
Yeah, decommodification. Not exactly something you hear in everyday conversation. What does it mean?
Well, it's basically about pushing back against this idea that absolutely everything should be treated as a commodity, something to be bought and sold in the market.
Oh, interesting. So it's challenging that logic that says the market is the solution for everything. Right.
Exactly. It's about saying, hey, maybe there are some things that shouldn't be subject to the rules of supply and demand,
Yep.
Like healthcare, education, access to clean water. Those are essential for human well-being.
Yeah, those are basic needs, not luxuries.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel right to treat them like any other product you can just buy or sell.
Right. Wallerstein would argue that there are certain goods and services that just shouldn't be treated as mere commodities, that we need a different way of valuing and distributing those things.
I see. And he points to existing examples of decommodification already happening, right? Like universities and hospitals. At least in theory, they operate according to a different set of values where knowledge creation and healing are more important than profit.
Exactly. He uses those examples to show us how decommodification is possible. It's not some pie-in-the-sky idea. The challenge he sees is expanding that logic to other areas of life, like those industries that have been really hit hard by globalization, those that have been most ruthlessly subjected to the logic of the market.
So it's not just about tearing down the existing system, but also about building up these alternative models, these spaces where different values can flourish.
You got it. And that actually connects really well with Wallerstein's fourth and maybe most challenging component, developing a clear vision of what that more democratic and egalitarian world actually looks like.
So it's not enough to just say we want a better world. We need to actually get specific about what that better world looks like in very concrete terms.
It's about moving beyond those vague slogans and really wrestling with those tough questions. How do we want to organize society? How do we make decisions? How do we share resources? How do we relate to each other and to the planet?
It's about creating a blueprint for that better world, a plan we can actually work towards. And that sounds like a pretty daunting task.
It is a tall order, no doubt. But it's also where the real work of transformation lies. And Wallerstein reminds us that it's not just about coming up with these grand visions, it's also about taking action. It's about rolling up our sleeves and getting involved in the messy, day-to-day work of building those alternatives, starting right here, right now, in our own communities.
It's like that balance between dreaming big and taking concrete steps, right?
Exactly. And it's important to remember this process of creating a more just and sustainable world, it's going to be full of twists and turns. It's not a straight line to some perfect utopia.
It's more like a winding path with lots of unexpected detours and obstacles along the way.
Exactly. And Wallerstein would say we need to embrace that uncertainty, that constant need for adaptation and learning as we go. Building a better world, it's not about arriving at some perfect endpoint. It's about that continual striving, experimenting, learning from mistakes, and always moving forward.
It really is a journey, not a destination, isn't it?
Beautifully put. And what a journey it is. Wallerstein's analysis of these movements has given us a lot to consider, their history, their strategies, their successes and their failures. But more than that, it's left me with this feeling of possibility, this sense that we're not just passive bystanders watching history unfold. We can actually shape it.
Yeah, that's empowering, isn't it? It's like we're not just inheriting the world as it is. We're actively creating it with every choice we make, every action we take.
Exactly. And I think that's what Wallerstein is ultimately getting at. We're not powerless. We have agency. We have the ability to create change. And that brings us back to that question we posed earlier. Given the challenges and opportunities of this moment in history, what forms of resistance and transformation do you think are most needed to create that more just and sustainable world?
As we've been talking about all these movements and these struggles for a better world, I keep thinking about something Wallerstein said that really stuck with me. He said, history is on no one's side.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement.
It is, isn't it? And I'll be honest, it kind of threw me off at first. Almost like he's saying that all these efforts to create change, to make the world more just and sustainable place, like it's all pointless in the end.
Yeah, I can see how you might interpret it that way, but I don't think that's what he's getting at.
Oh, good, because I was starting to get a little depressed. So if he's not saying that our efforts are futile, what's the message behind that statement? What does it mean to say that history is on no one's side?
I think what he's doing is rejecting this idea that the future is already decided. Like there's this grand historical narrative playing out. We're all just along for the ride.
So it's not about assuming that progress is inevitable or, on the flip side, that we're doomed to just keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
Exactly. He's saying we have to recognize that we actually have agency, that the choices we make, they actually matter.
We have the power to shape the course of history.
Yeah, that's it. It's a perspective that's both empowering and a little bit daunting, I think.
Definitely both. It's empowering because it reminds us that we can make a difference, that our even the small ones, they can have a ripple effect. But it's also daunting because there are no guarantees. Success isn't just going to fall into our laps.
You've got it. We have to be strategic, creative, persistent. It's a call to action, I think.
It's like embracing both the uncertainty and the possibility of this moment, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing that we're not just passive passengers, we're active participants in creating the future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think Wallerstein would appreciate that blend of realism and a sense of possibility. He knew that building a better world, it's a messy process. It's an ongoing project.
It's not about reaching some perfect utopia. It's about constantly striving, adapting, and learning along the way.
Absolutely. It's about the journey, not just the destination.
And as we wrap up our deep dive into Wallerstein's work, I'm feeling a mix of emotions. There's a sense of urgency because the challenges we face are huge and, well, time is ticking. But there's also this glimmer of hope, this feeling that another world, a better world, is actually within reach.
And that possibility, it's not something that just handed to us, right? It's something we have to create through our choices, through our actions, through our willingness to challenge the status quo and to imagine something different.
It's a collective project, isn't it? It's about coming together, sharing ideas, supporting each other, and taking action, even when we're not sure what the outcome will be. And I think Wallerstein's work, even though it's dealing with these complex theories and historical analysis, I think it ultimately offers us a message of hope, a message of empowerment.
I agree. He reminds us that we're not just passive observers. We can actually make history. And the story of these movements, these struggles for a better world, it's still being written. And we all have the opportunity to write the next chapter.
What a powerful thought. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of anti-systemic movements. We hope it's given you some new ideas to think about, some new perspectives to consider.
Absolutely. Keep questioning, keep exploring, keep connecting with others, and keep pushing for the changes you want to see.
Until next time, fellow deep divers, stay curious.